Hi, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, Savage Reads. I have read some interesting books this last week that I am excited to talk about. As for crafting updates, the knitting, I have done a lot of work on it, but it looks about the same as last week. So I'll update you probably next week when I have finished the front of the sweater, and then I will move on to the two sleeves, and maybe I'll get a sweater before it warms up again in spring. I'm sure it will only take me a month or two more, but who knows with these kinds of projects. So let's jump into some of the books that I have read this last week. So if you have followed my channel for a while, you know that self-help is not my favorite genre, but I read two books that kind of fall into that category this last week. And one of them had some of those elements that makes it worthwhile, that makes me think, okay, this book has what I'm looking for in a self-help, and the other one, not quite as much. So let's start by talking about the one that worked well for me. So I finally got around to reading The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood Caused an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt. The idea is that we protect our kids so much from perceived dangers in the actual world that we don't let them get out and explore and figure things out for themselves. But we don't protect them enough from the dangers that are in the virtual world. And the author gives a really clear explanation of why having so much freedom in the virtual world is harmful to our young people's mental health, and how we can change that in our families and communities. The main takeaways that you get from this book are to keep your kids away from screens, especially social media, until they are older, maybe 16, 17, so that they can get through that early adolescence without those really difficult influences. And it really lays out all the harmful things that might come from over-reliance on technology. Now, on the flip side, it also has some recommendations for allowing your kid to go out and be more independent, walk to the store by themselves, walk to school by themselves, and have some of that independence that likely you had as a kid, but now is looked down upon. And so ways that we can have our kids be out, do things alone, fail, and it's gonna be okay. I read this book because my husband read it first and was saying, we need to read this to make sure we're on the same page with parenting and what are we gonna do with technology with our kids. And so I think it is a great conversation starter that way. And I do think that we have implemented a few changes based on the recommendations in this book, trying to let our 9-year-old have a little more independence. And it reaffirms our decision to not give our children screens or phones. Now, this book does the two things that I'm looking for in a kind of self-help type book. One, it gives really clear and concrete recommendations that are actually something you are going to implement. It influences how you live your day-to-day life, and that is exactly what I want out of a book like this. And secondly, it is very well researched. There are a lot of notes and resources and studies that you can go into. You know that the author is not just pulling all of this out of thin air. There is research to back up his claims. There were some elements that I thought, okay, you maybe are painting this a little bit too broadly, or this isn't really taking into account different lifestyles and different needs that people may have. So while I think that this is a great conversation starter, I can definitely see how, depending on your situation, you may have to adapt based on your actual needs. And so I thought that overall, this is a good one. This is what I look for in a self-help type book. Now, this next book that is also kind of in that genre is All About Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks. And I'm going to just read you a little bit of the description. It says, All About Love offers radical new ways to think about love by showing its interconnectedness in our private and public lives. In 11 concise chapters, Hooks explains how our everyday notions of what it means to give and receive love often fail us, and these ideals are established in early childhood. She offers a rethinking of self-love that will bring peace and compassion to our personal and professional lives and asserts the place of love to end struggles between individuals, in communities, and among societies. So this book is exploring a very important topic that I do think needs to be talked about more. But this book is also very much in the philosophy space. And so this book is not really backed up by data. It is more backed up by other philosophers, other people, scripture, and her own lived experiences. Now, I do think there is a place for that kind of thing, but I do find it a little annoying when not only is it not based on real research, I didn't feel like I left this book with anything concrete that I could do to make my life better. And while I agree that love is so important, I just didn't leave with anything that is going to stick with me other than love is good. And I feel like that's a bit of a basic message for me to read a whole book about. So I think this book is good. You read the book and you say, yes, 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 I agree with all of that. Yes, this is important. But when you leave it, what then? Is it some new research that you learned that you would never have thought of on your own? Not really. Is it something really concrete that, yes, I need to do this in my life? I didn't get that. Now, you personally might find something that you really connect with in this book and that changes how you see the world, and that is wonderful. And that is what these kinds of books are supposed to do, but I didn't really get that out of there. And so out of the 2 self-help books that I read the last week, I do think that The Anxious Generation was better just because it has the research to back it up and it has the concrete ways that you can apply what you have learned in the book, where All About Love gives you a lot of great philosophy, but nowhere to go with it. Now, last week I listened to the book Calypso by David Sedaris, and I had such a good time revisiting it that I decided to revisit a few of his other books that were available at my library. So I listened to Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim, Let's Explore Diabetes with Owls, and Theft by Finding. Now, his essay books were great and delightful. It wasn't quite as good as Calypso because I didn't have quite as much space. I read these ones in the past couple of years, and so it wasn't quite as fun as revisiting stories that have had more space and more time for me to forget them, but it was what I needed this last week. I enjoyed it, I had fun. If you are a David Sedaris person and you love David Sedaris, then maybe pick up Theft by Finding. But if you haven't read David Sedaris, don't start with that one. His collections of essays are really great, but Theft by Finding is his diaries from 1977 through 2002 edited down. You get into the head of David Sedaris more, but I don't think that's the place to start. And if you just jumped right into this, you might say, who is this and what is happening? Because his essays are much better and more curated. But something that I did love about the diaries is just looking at the things that he chose to write down. It has really made me want to keep a diary and not necessarily focus on what I have done each day and the events, but instead focus on the crazy, the weird, the delightful, the things that you come across, because I think it makes you look at the world in a way that you find so much more wonder when you remember some of those little delightful off-the-wall things that happen on the day-to-day when you are looking for them. And so it has inspired me in my own personal writing. I sometimes struggle to want to write a diary or a journal where I keep track of what I have done each day because I get bored. But if I'm writing down a funny story that I heard at yoga class, or some musings on somebody I saw sitting on a bench at the park, or even just delightful things that my daughters have said throughout the day, I did find going through his diaries to be rather inspiring on the writing front, but definitely not the place that you should start with on David Sedaris. Now, this next book was a recommendation from Caitlin at Bandy's Books, and I swear I was on hold for this book for a year at the library, and I am so glad I finally got to it. But it probably suffered a little bit from the anticipation of having to wait quite so long. But I finally read Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. And the description says, Misha is a jaded scriptwriter who has been working in Hollywood for years and has just been nominated for his first Oscar. But when he's pressured by his producers to kill off a gay character in the upcoming season finale for the algorithm, Misha discovers that it's not that simple. As he is haunted by his past and past mistakes, Misha must risk everything to find a way to do what's right before it's too late. Basically, we have our main character, Misha, who is a scriptwriter and has written all of these horror plots, and all of his horror creations are coming back to haunt him. And I loved the idea of it. I thought that some of these twists and turns were really interesting. I thought some of the commentary on the algorithm was really interesting and timely. It did give me a little bit of that Grady Hendrix type book, a little bit humorous, tongue-in-cheek, wasn't taking itself too seriously, which I really enjoy that type of book. There were a couple times the writing took me out of the story, just some clunky turns of phrase and things that I thought, this should have been caught in editing. This could have been polished up just a little bit. Like, if you're looking into a mirror, you don't need to say, I stared at my own cerulean blue eyes. Like, it felt a little bit clunky just on occasion, but you know what? Overall, this was just really great. It does have a lot of violence and horror elements and blood, and so be aware going into it. If you like something a little bit horror, thriller, I think this is a good one. Now I thought, hey, I enjoyed this book. I should see what else this author has written. And what? And I thought maybe I'll just look up what else this author has written, and oh my heavens. I guess Chuck Tingle has made a bit of a turn from where he started out writing-wise. Well, this book didn't have any sex scenes. Some of just the titles of his past books. One of the least disturbing titles is Space Raptor Butt Invasion. If that interests you, you might want to check out this author, but I think I'm gonna be a little bit wary of any other Chuck Tingle books that come across my radar. And that is what I have read in the last week or so. If you have thoughts on these books, let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you all on the next one.